Glad to be with you today on the Public Square. I'm Wayne Shepherd with a table full of participants around here. Dave Zanotti is here, Jeff Sanders, Melanie Elsey, Rob Walgate, Alan C. Duncan, and Patty Maruntas at the table now. And I guess it's story time today, huh, Dave?
Yes. Once upon a time, this is where we go. And the story today is about school choice. Once upon a time, there was an institution called the Supreme Court that actually functioned many, many years ago in the context of constitutional boundaries. That's another part of the story. But before we go there, we want to go back to an experience that we had quite a number of years ago. And the reason we're talking about it right now is this is the month. We're coming to the end of the court decisions. This is the time of year where Rob Walgate tells us there's two seasons. There's June and October, where the non-elected judges of the Supreme Court tell us what the law is.
9 people in black robes apparently don't understand the Constitution, or we as the American people depend on them to misinterpret the Constitution.
Well, sometimes the president makes that decision too, right?
Well, and depending. So there's clearly the dysfunctionality and the very honest confusion in our culture about the role of the courts. And so let's deal with that for just a second. All you have to do is read Article 3. It's the smallest article of the three. Article 1 establishes Congress, Article 2, the executive branch, and Article 3, the federal court system. It's real simple. Congress establishes the courts. Congress controls the jurisdiction and the size of the court. And the federal court system is designed in very few instances to be a trial court of first appeal, where you go because you have a federal problem when it comes to an argument. Most of these things are settled in state law. That's by design. We didn't want to have a federal judiciary that was doing what it's doing right now. That wasn't the idea. The framers of the country recognized it would be a much more just system the closer we kept it to home. However, as everything else has gone in our country, there is a significant margin of profitability for some people to attempt to make everything about big government. And so the courts have fallen into that problem for many, many reasons. I probably got 6 or 8 really good books. They probably stack up about, a foot and a half high in regards to analysis of how we got there over the years. And that many, that pile, at least that great on original source documents on how we've gotten there. We've studied this. We're not masters of it, but there is a clear line of demarcation and progress and shows you how we got into the mess that we're in. But what it comes down to is most people think that the courts not only decide what the law is, they decide what reality is. And that's where it gets exceptionally creepy, because there's a thing in Supreme Court decisions called dicta, D-I-C-T-A. That's the rhetoric that's written down in those lengthy documents that really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the findings of the court on a specific case. But the justices decided they just like to talk a while. And so they put their opinions in the record. You say, well, that's nice of them. We pay for that stuff, yeah. But what they often do is they put in the dicta a path of logic that they see can be exploited, manipulated, used in coming years. And so there's a trail and a progression of thought in the court, because federal appointments for all judges are for life. So judges that take what they're doing as a means of not simply interpreting the law or resolving conflicts, particularly in the federal system, which it's supposed to be an appellate court with limited jurisdiction, almost no original jurisdiction. What I mean by that is you just don't, if you've got an argument over a piece of property, you don't file a case at the United States Supreme Court. You can't get there. They don't have jurisdiction over that. That comes way back down the system, because it was established by the Constitution that they were not to have original jurisdiction except in very few instances, like international treaties and arguments between the states and these sorts of things. It makes a lot of sense. It's like a board game. The rules work.
And we've seen them get involved in federal elections where they would be the go-to.
Right. Yeah. So there's
very few instances.
There's a role and a legitimate role and a legitimate history. It has been tortured, however, in the last 100 years, particularly the last 50 years, to where we are today, where the court not only defines the law, but in many cases attempts to define reality.
And we always hear, well, that's the law of the land. Well, actually, it's not the law.
It's not the law of the land.
That's
a ruling.
Decision
That's a
of the land.
finding of the court. It's not the law because the court doesn't make law.
Right. And many times they've made errors. And so we have to go back and fix those errors. And it's always interesting to hear people talk about how they like the court or dislike the court, depending on what ruling came out and what day it came out on, because the court may be the ultimate determiner of something if they agree with it, but they want it fixed if they don't agree with it. They want it overturned. So
this is a continuing, ongoing challenge for our country. And I understand that folks who spend their lives taking care of their families, paying their taxes, making a living, and trying to love the people in their lives well, don't have a lot of time for this nonsense because it just sounds like a bunch of trash. It's just blah, 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 blah. You people are making my life miserable, and I don't need this. Leave me alone. I can understand that.
did you ever envision, and I hate to take us down a path that I know we're not going, but just briefly, did you ever envision a time where you would see justices have their homes protested? Like, did we envision that happening when we talk about Article 1, Article 2, Article 3? I think that just highlights how much we've shown the court's grown in the influence people think it does or should have.
Or how about people clawing on the doors, leading to hearings as to who was going to be the next Supreme Court justice? Remember that?
Yeah, that actually happened.
That freaked me out.
Yeah, that was pretty creepy. So it's part of the power curve and part of people trying to capture the power game without understanding how this is all supposed to work. Okay, so we understand the environment that we're in, and it's a difficult environment, and we could talk about this for a long time, but let's talk about experience. Because back in 1997, we had what began as a simple meeting to talk with some people about school choice. Now, we've had the privilege of being involved in a number of issues that began in the states, in different places around the country, that grew up to be genuine reform movements and then change laws in states, change federal law, et cetera. We've had that privilege because we do public policy. So we were aware of school choice happening in Milwaukee and happening in Florida and being talked about. It was an up and coming issue. And we had an opportunity to go to a meeting, sit with a few people, it was very private, about what was the possibility of a school choice law coming up from these different regions. And then someone brought up the question of what about Ohio? And no one knew for sure, but they were looking at potential states. It wasn't too much longer from that several other meetings began to happen because Ohio elected a governor by the name of George V. Voinovich, George Victor Voinovich. We spent a lot of time with GVV, and it was a unique experience to travel as much as we did with a seated governor, to spend so much time in the courts and with his attorney generals and in doing things like defending the state motto the whole way through the federal system and winning that case, of doing the adoption task force. One of the first things that happened when George Voinovich got elected, because of his integrity on the question of pro-life, was he said, we need to take a look at adoption law in Ohio. And so we were tasked as a public policy organization to put together a team, and we were able to bring forward a proposal that turned into law, that turned into really something that served a lot of people well. So we had a chance to go through all those steps and processes. This guy was a good guy. He had a great wife. He had a good family. He wasn't perfect, but he was a good guy. And he tried to do a lot of things well. Now, he was a Republican, but he wasn't a partisan. And he wasn't supposed to be very successful because he had too many vowels in his name.
When I ran campaigns for a Republican candidate, the talk was they couldn't wait till Voinovich retired because Voinovich redefined fundraising for the Republicans.
Yeah.
They couldn't nail him down on that.
This guy was a very interesting person, and we knew him and were in context of relationship with him until he died. And it was an interesting, very interesting and wonderful opportunity. Now, from this relationship emanates the story that we're going to tell about school choice, because George Voinovich had a passion for education and a passion for family. Here's where he started. When we all heard this We all heard this multiple times, and I can remember one time we walked into a restaurant, and he made this comment, and we've heard him say it a number of different times. He would look over a restaurant, and he's waiting to get in. Of course, he didn't call ahead. He didn't have reservations. He's standing in line like everybody else. This is the kind of guy who was carrying his own bags before Jimmy Carter did it on camera. I mean, this is a guy who drove a gray Ford. He was just a normal guy, working class guy from the greater Cleveland area. And was not ashamed of it. This stuff didn't matter to him. He worked really, really hard. He worked all day, then he went home, he had dinner with his wife, and then he opened his briefcase and he worked all night. It's just the way he was. And he was inexhaustible. So we're at this restaurant, and he looks around and all these people, and it's like takes a few minutes, and people going, psst, 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 elbows. It's governor, it's governor, it's governor, it's governor, it's governor. Now, it was kind of a big deal because George wasn't. He was a little guy. George was a small man of stature, and there was nothing about him that claimed movie star.
And he never made you feel like he was the most important person in the room.
No.
Never. I remember one of my first jobs here at the Round Table, and we were going to a press conference in Columbus on another issue, and Dave threw me the keys to the car and said, we have to talk about the press conference on the way down. You're driving. And he was the United States Senator at the time, and I was like a nervous wreck. I thought, I'm going to wreck. One of my first responsibilities, and we're going to make national news. My name won't be mentioned, but the senator was in the car. So,
but let me tell you what he said in the restaurant while everyone was nosing him. He looked over and he said, if I had a magic wand as a politician, I could do one thing. I'd fix the family. Because if we could fix families, politicians would be a lot less necessary in our country.
Oh, man. It's profound.
Well, glad to have that part of the story told here today, but there's much more to come on this story of school choice, and we'll get to it on the Public Square as you stay with us now. All right, let's continue the story today on the Public Square. The topic is school choice. Dave?
Now, we had our issues with our dear friend George Voinovich. We took different issues on questions of campaign finance reform. We took different issues on questions of taxation. We sued our good friend.
I was going to say, maybe even sued him once.
We sued him as governor. And
what
won.
are friends for, huh?
Well, but
no, actually, we didn't win that case. That case got tossed out. No, it was Taft that we sued and won.
But he was always honest with us, and we were always honest with him. There were never any surprises.
Now, sometimes he was not a man of great stature, but he had high volume. And I can remember the night that my kids were supposed to be in bed, and I had a phone call, and George was really upset about Melanie Elsie's work to take outcome-based education out of the state budget. That I don't know, it was 242 pages or something.
You got yelled at because of Melanie's work?
It was 800 pages.
800 pages, yeah.
Melanie caused all this.
Melanie caused all this in her statewide campaign, going around telling people what outcome-based education really was. And what had happened was the governor got caught with a holdover from a prior Democrat administration that had planted this in the budget, and his people didn't catch up with it in time. So now we're at the last phases of the budget. Melanie's going around statewide, and basically she's blowing up the state house. I can't say that anymore, can we? All right. In regards to letters and phone calls, she's igniting. I can't say that either. She's creating a fury in the state house of interest over outcome-based education.
So new respect, Melanie. New respect.
Yes. Well, I'm telling you. So the governor calls me, and the conversation got louder and louder and louder. And my kids said, "Mom, who's Dad yelling at on the phone?" Because what I found with ethnics from Cleveland, is that
their volume.
You have to match the volume, or you're not going to get anywhere.
The Italians can do this.
Okay,
yes, they can.
So it got loud, and my wife said, "Don't worry, kids. It's the governor. It'll be okay." But you know what? It reached a point when the last decibels hit. And then there was a total silence. He said, "How many pages have to come out?" I said, "All of them." When? Tomorrow. Done. Good night. Click.
Wow.
And you weren't worried because if he said it was going to be done,
He would do it.
He would do it.
We knew he would do it.
Wow.
And so this is the contextual reality of relationship. Now, you don't get that. It wasn't singular. It was me. It was Melanie. It was Patty. Everybody was, and this started back when he was mayor of the city of Cleveland, in serving him to assist him and help him and build relationships. And this is why humans who are not connected to political parties and trying to beat somebody can be such great allies of people in public service by just helping them.
And he was willing to listen to everyone.
Yeah.
But he was going to lead.
Right.
He was going to take information from everywhere, but he was going to lead even when it wasn't the easy decision.
He didn't do it by committee. He was willing to make the decision. So, okay, now we got kind of the background and the context, to be fair. And why are we telling this story? Because you know what, Wayne? We didn't have a radio program when we were doing this. We had a 2-minute show, and there wasn't enough time in 2 minutes to tell all this, number one.
Okay.
Number two, some of the things we're saying right now, we couldn't say because several of the people are no longer here. They're on to their reward. And so we are not breaking the confidences that we always keep when we're permitted to come behind closed doors and work on policy matters. And so we can talk about this stuff now more openly.
And just to be clear, you were around, of course. Melanie was, as we heard. Patty, you were a part of this as well, right?
Right.
I was a part of it from the State House as an aide first.
Okay.
So I got to hang out with Governor Voinovich.
And so Patty stood out at such a level that we began to try to hook her to come to work for us. and by God's grace, we were able to make that happen. And Melanie was actually working for several organizations way back when, and we also extended that invitation, and the migration across that bridge also happened. So when we look at, we're dealing with a group of people around this table that are career professionals in this arena.
Yeah, but no Rob. No Rob at this point, right?
Rob he was just out of footy pajamas. And
when the case started in 97, no, but we had come to know each other in June of 01, and the case was decided in June of 02, I believe. So we actually, I will say, when the case was decided, that's the first time that Dave Zanotti ever turned me down to play a round of golf. I invited him to come, and the time was different then in the sense of communication. You know, now you can be somewhere, you have a phone, you can text, you can send out a press release, you could call, and they weren't sure when the decision was going to come down. I invited him to play in Lou Holt's Upper Ohio Valley Hall of Fame golf outing with everyone that was going to be there, and he was like, I really want to come, but there's zero chance we can make that happen because of when the case comes down, they knew it was going to be press conferences galore. And it wasn't like taking video on a phone and sending it to someone.
No, you couldn't phone it in. There was no Zoom.
Yeah.
My, how things have changed.
But is it for the better or is it worse?
Well, I can tell you Rob was a 30 handicap back then, and he is not that anymore. Okay. So here's what happened, Wayne. This relationship reached a point of Governor Voinovich had a number of things he was quite passionate about, education and the family being one of them. And he was greatly concerned that urban centers in the state of Ohio were not able to deliver educational products and educational opportunities and educational experiences that were safe and that were progressing students based on test results to the place they needed to go. And that troubled him greatly. It bothered him a lot. As a former mayor of the city of Cleveland, it concerned him mightily. Now, he had an excellent record in regards to the question of race relations. And in the city of Cleveland, this wasn't just talking about black students. This was talking about black, white, Hispanic, Asian, everybody. And so he was concerned. And it was crystal clear that we had a problem in the rural communities. We had a problem in the urban communities. And so he began to ask the question, what if? What if there was a way to bring more educational opportunities into urban centers? And several independent people who were, they were partisans, to be sure, but they were not politicians. People in the business community had been asking the same question for a good amount of time. And so they began to talk. And what ended up happening was a piece of legislation started to get outlined on the table, 1997. And I think it started back in 95 was the outline started to come. And so different people began to find out about this and add, and we were invited after the outcome-based education situation. The governor sort of mentioned to a few people that they might not want to get Melanie Elsey upset. And so with the networks that she had in home education, et cetera. And so we began to be brought quietly into this conversation. And so I brought back one of the original pieces of the legislative draft, Patty and Melanie, and we sat down and we worked our way through it and we marked it up. And we still have the markup of that piece in a safety deposit box or a secure file somewhere, fireproof file, because the original markup on that legislation, we were able, based upon experiences that we shared that others didn't quite have, to make some serious changes in that original piece of legislation. And then people began to realize that there's the possibility that this piece of legislation might be the one that would go the whole way through the United States Supreme Court and define whether or not school choice would be considered constitutional. Now, there was competition at the time. Milwaukee had a plan. Florida was developing plans. Could have been any one of those make its way to the Supreme Court. But we recognized very quickly we better make sure that this is constructed in such a way that if this is the case, we don't lose on standing, or we don't lose because we failed to anticipate what justices would actually want to do. And then the Voinovich administration did something very, very smart. They brought in a lawyer who had been a clerk for Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who understood her mind on these issues very well, and they began to incorporate that expertise into the process. So we had excellent legal work. We had Melanie Elsey. Okay, we had and a whole network of people in the business community, and we began to hammer through that legislation, which eventually did pass the Ohio House and the Senate, and then was signed by Governor Voinovich, and immediately was challenged in state court. So first off, we got it passed, which was pretty big and pretty serious, but it wasn't like within 30 seconds, here we go. So the county court case was filed, and then the appellate, it then went up to the next level. The appellate court was filed, and then we went to the state Supreme Court. So we had 3 courtrooms in the state of Ohio, and ultimately the state of Ohio Supreme Court ruled that the way this had been constructed, it was in fact constitutional. It did not violate the First Amendment. It was a fair and just, equitable approach. It was not a problem with the school funding formulas. It was not a problem on all these other issues. This could work, and it should work. And I remember the day that decision came down in the state Supreme Court, and we were like, wow. I mean, it took several years. We got it. Now, Patty, this was the second visit to the state Supreme Court, right?
Correct. First time they shot it down because of the single subject issue, because it was inside a budget with other things. Mm-hmm. So they wanted it to be cleaned up and redone.
It's funny how the left wins those cases, but the right never wins those cases on single subject. It's amazing how that works. But anyhow, yeah. So then it comes back the second time, and the policy on its face is considered constitutional. So everybody thinks this is great, this is over. Not exactly.
Try again.
What ended up happening, to the surprise of everyone, was immediately the ACLU and the teachers unions filed in federal court and basically tried to stop the program.
All right, let me break in. There's so much more to this story, and we'll get to the U.S. Supreme Court part of the story next on The Public Square. This edition of the program is a weekly edition, and thankful that you're listening. But if you ever miss an episode, check it out online, thepublicsquare.com, or use our smartphone app to listen anytime. All right, we've nearly made it to the U.S. Supreme Court here in telling this story of school choice. So let's move on, Dave.
So along the line, what was happening was, to validate this program, the program was now fully functional. There were students, and it was passed as a pilot plan. The idea being that the courts could embrace a pilot plan more effectively than an instantaneous, universal, statewide sort of plan. George Voinovich had a theory. He said, you have to crawl before you walk. You have to walk before you run. And he was right.
Cleveland was a good place to work on this because Cleveland was in such bad shape.
Right.
I think they actually had to get the district released from a federal judge to state control so that they could do this.
Because it was a system that was in crisis. And so this pilot plan was established. And it was established very carefully. It was not just established with an opportunity for there to be educational, at the time the term was vouchers, but there was also a pilot tutoring plan that was also connected to it. So if parents chose that they wanted to keep their kids in the public school, but they still wanted more help, they could participate in this specialized scholarship for tutoring as well. And it was really a smart thing. And the piece was put together well. So here we go. Now, all of a sudden, we're in federal court. It's like, what? I mean, you didn't get to blow the candles off the cake, man. Now, all of a sudden, bam, there they are. But at the same time, we've now got lots of schools participating. We had 54 private schools just inside the Cleveland district that were participating in saying yes. And for this to work, you had to have a lottery system because there were so many people that wanted to have a shot at getting these scholarships. And I mean, we literally would get phone calls from parents who were asking us to pray with them through tears. Pray that my number gets drawn, that my child can go to a different school because they're just not safe here anymore.
And Dave, once their number was drawn, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were allowed then to include siblings. They were guaranteed to be able to receive the voucher all the way through 12th grade.
Yeah.
And siblings in the lottery system were given a priority.
Parents who received one of the vouchers would call us back weeping, saying, this is the greatest day of my life. This is the greatest thing I could have ever won in my life. I've got a chance for my kid. This was really serious. And we're talking about people of all descriptions here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking as you talk about this court case, you talked about common police court where it started, then the appellate level, then the state Supreme Court, now federal court. I've been involved in some litigation. That's not a cheap endeavor to be defending the project.
And you say, well, the state's got to defend the law. Yes, they do, but it took a lot more. This was new ground.
Yeah.
And so the expertise had to come in from a lot of different places. So what's happening while this is happening, there's also that there is, in addition to that, a number of business people decided to make the brag real. And so they opened 3 private schools. In one summer, they opened 3 private schools, K through 6, inside the boundaries of the city of Cleveland where the school choice plan was operating. And those schools were filled instantly. They were filled instantly. These were non-sectarian schools. They called them Hope schools. All right, and parents chose to go there. So you have Jewish schools, Islamic schools, the Hope schools, non-sectarian. You've got Catholic schools, Lutheran schools, all these different people participating. All right, all by design. All right, it was set up this way. Now they go to federal court, and of course they're saying it's unconstitutional because it discriminates unfairly toward religious education. It's a violation of the First Amendment. It's
Establishment clause.
Establishment clause. They get all, and this is the ACLU and the teachers unions going after this thing. And we're in district court, and we lose the first case. Not only do we lose, but Judge Solomon Oliver decides to shut the program down the week before school is about to start.
Oh, that's chaos.
So all these parents who won the lottery, all these schools that were happening, all this that was going on are now thrown out.
So I have a question. I'm just thinking about that. I'm thinking about today, we would know it because people would text on their phone or we'd see it on the news, on the website. You got to be dealing. We're in the beginning of just the cell phone era of being able to call people. So how that had to be even more chaotic because you're not all hearing the same message.
The cell phone was in the car with the antenna.
It was the car phone.
I remember those days.
And we were at the court waiting on the ruling of the judge, no phone in our hands. And they would come down, and when the decision was ready, and there it was, they dropped it in the box, and you stood in line with the media and all the other players, and you got the opinion. Now, at that stage in the game, you got a lot of reading to do because just outside the door, there are all the cameras and all the lights and all the trucks from all over the country wanting to know what the judge just said. The reporters go flying out to tell everybody they lost, and he shut down the program. So I'm standing in a corner, and I learned through the first run, you read the court decisions.
Go to the back of the book first.
Back to front. Okay.
Go to the back of the book first.
You get to the final, and then you work your way back forward. And out we walk to a news conference. All right, there on the steps, and everyone's saying, "What are you going to do? You're done. You're finished. You lost. You give up."
No.
And what we said was, "No, this will not stand. This is a complete error. This is an error on the part of the judge, and we will contest this the whole way to the United States Supreme Court. It's just that simple." Well, he shut down the program for the kids. And our response was, this will not stand. Those kids will be in school in a week. How are you going to do it? Just watch. End of conversation.
The parents and families in the program didn't have phones. Some didn't even have home phones because of where they lived, income level. So the other way that this information got out was word of mouth. People went to the schools and asked what was going on. So a lot of this information was neighborhood-based.
We knew they were going to click onto the local news that afternoon and that evening, and so we had one shot to communicate
this is
to
the
them.
lead story.
This will not stand. School will start in a week. And then I called Patty from the car phone, and she said, "How are we going to do that?"
Okay.
I call Patty all the time and ask her that question today.
So here's the thought. Since the end of this story, a whole lot of people have managed to take a lot of credit for what happened in Cleveland, in the program and the policy, et cetera, and we've never told this part of the story. Now, it's fine. Who cares? And because look how far we're from. We're not looking for credit now. But I will tell you, when that decision came out and we walked out those steps, none of those people were standing there. They weren't involved. They didn't know what had happened in the legislative process. They didn't have that marked up bill in their fires-proof safe. They didn't have all those people and friends and relationships and allies. And we didn't start that. We were a part of it. They didn't know the real alliance that was doing all of this because those people weren't looking for credit. They were looking to help kids. They didn't know. So that night, we're trying to figure out, how is this going to work? So what we did was we called a couple of trustees of this organization, several of whom have now passed on. And we said, we got a real jam. We got 54 schools. We got a big bill. We got tuition payments, and these schools are going to have to get paid. And those people instantly transferred some funds. We went back downtown Cleveland on the same steps, and we brought one of those giant golf course checks, like in Happy Gilmore where you have the great big cardboard check. And it was the school choice committee, and there was a big number on it. And we announced to the media that we were making a national call to support the children in this program. And that we'd started, here's our initial check, so we're putting our money where our mouth is. And we will find a way, by the grace of God, to pay the tuition for these students so that these schools can continue to function until we get through the United States Supreme Court.
And we got donations from across the country. It was amazing.
When we held that news conference, we didn't have it. We had the guarantee on the check that we put forward. Mm-hmm. That was guaranteed. We didn't have any guarantees from anyone else. We did that news conference hoping to God that the word would get out around the country. Within 24 hours, planes started landing in Ohio with people, men and women, with briefcases and checkbooks in those briefcases.
How exciting to hear the story retold here. But there's more, as they often say. Wait, there's more. It's coming up on the Public Square as you stay with us now.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
So the federal district court delivers a decision against school choice, and they shut down the schools that were about to open. Jeff, you had a question about that.
Unfortunately, this happens quite a bit, but I'm always scratching my head. How does one person have this enormous amount of authority to just strike down a program for everyone? And on what basis did he say that it was unconstitutional or not right?
And on top of that question, how can someone be so callous that they want to kick children out of a classroom where they would have a chance to be successful?
Fortunately, a lot of people around the country asked the same questions, and they answered with their prayers and their checkbooks.
Mm-hmm.
And by God's grace, we were able to get the tuition payments started. Now, it wasn't very long before that money started to run out.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing we had going was the principals. Remember, we had lunch with the principals, and you've never seen people so tired and frazzled, but they were committed. To the best of my knowledge, no student was kicked out regardless of those payments because those schools came together and did what they needed to do.
One of those lunches, the funds were beginning to run out. Mm-hmm. And we had a lunch, and the principals were there, and they were crying. They were exhausted. They were saying, we don't know how much longer we can go. What's the future? What's the option? And I didn't have any other answers except that we have to pray and we have to keep going. And we got this far. Let's see what happens next. And I left that lunch, and it's still a very emotional reality. I left that lunch and thought to myself, these are the heroes. No one's ever going to know their names. They're just doing their job. They're just loving kids. As God gives them the grace to love kids, they want to do the right thing.
And I don't think we had a meeting with them where they didn't talk about the children in the schools.
Yeah.
They had names and faces and stories.
Families.
They were real people to these principals.
So after one of those meetings, I got in the car, and I'm kind of flatter than a pancake, and I'm driving back from the city of Cleveland, and I get a call from Patty, and she says, "You're going to have to turn around." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because there's reporters waiting for you." I said, "Oh, no. What kind of trouble are we in now?" She said, "Well, the Supreme Court has just weighed in on the case, and they have decided to stay the judge's ruling, shutting down this program. The program will remain open through the entire appellate process. Those kids will go back to school, and the state will pay the balance of the tuition." And so, again, this was car phone days. I said, "Okay, I'm pulling off right now. Could you say that one more time, please? I want to make sure I heard what you said." And she repeated the whole thing. And I said, "At the risk of being extremely rude, because I can see the exit I'm going to have to get off on up ahead and turn back around, can I repeat to you what I thought I heard you say and make sure that I've got it exactly right?" I couldn't believe it.
He said, "Head north."
Yeah. Turn around.
Head downtown.
The reporters are waiting. And so our team turned around, and we went back, and we explained to people our response to what had just happened. And that set the tone, which then took us through the circuit court in Cincinnati, where we lost. We lost in the district court, Solomon Oliver, but the impact on the kids was stayed so that they were held harmless and safe. We went to Cincinnati. We got drubbed in Cincinnati. We got beat in Cincinnati in a panel. And then the question was, do we appeal to all of the full panel, or do we try to go straight to the Supreme Court? Based on what we had seen in the favorable ruling, we thought, let's go to the Supreme. Let's not be afraid to go to the Supreme Court as fast as we can. And so the next thing you know, now we're basically in a situation where this case, and no one knew what case it would be, this Ohio case is now the case before the United States Supreme Court. It was called the Zelman case. Everybody remembers Superintendent Zelman, right? Mm-hmm. That was the superintendent of schools. Susan Zelman. Mm-hmm. And it was basically the ACLU and the teachers unions versus the people of the state of Ohio and this particular plan. Now, the difference between losing at the appellate court level, the federal court, and then moving to the Supreme Court, and all the things that have been placed in the record, because remember, you don't get another fresh trial when you get to the Supreme Court. They look at the appeal based on what has been put in the record to date and the decision. So we had to have it right from the first court where we lost. Then we had to make sure that we had it absolutely right in the second court, because you don't get any do-overs with the Supreme Court. So the question is, did you build the plan right? Did you build the arguments right? Do you have any chance before the United States Supreme Court? And at that point in time, we had people involved in this case from all over the country, and some of them bailed. They were so upset that the program got drubbed in the Sixth Circuit Court in Cincinnati that they said, the Ohio people don't know what they're doing. They can't make this work. The only way we're going to stick with this is if you hire new lawyers, and we'll tell you which lawyers to hire. And they actually came to us and said, you have to tell your friend the governor and his attorney general that we need new lawyers, and we'll fund the whole thing, but we have to have new lawyers because we can't win at the Supreme Court. Now, that was a really easy phone call to make. So I started with the attorney general.
It's not like you've had a yelling match with him previously.
Right. Well, and actually what I did is I went to the attorney general first, and I said, this is the situation. I'm passing along this message. And I, without opinion, this is what I was told. So please hold me harmless for a moment. This is what I was told. And the attorney general's name was Betty Montgomery. She's still alive. She's still a wonderful human being and a great lawyer. And she said to me, David, I'm the attorney general of the state of Ohio. This is my job. This is my case.
And I know what I'm doing.
And I can assure you, just like we stuck and stayed the course the whole way through the state motto case and won, just like we've done so many other things together, we know what we're doing. And I said, thank you, Attorney General. You are also my Attorney General. Thank you. I know exactly what to say to these folks. And we went back and we informed them that this was the Ohio case, and we would stay with the Ohio Attorney General to the end. Now, most of these people are now gone, but let's just say if we were to name names, which we won't do because it's just these things happen, it was a misunderstanding that was a very expensive misunderstanding. Because several of these people were so upset that they withdraw their support. And you talked about, Rob, how much does it take to go through six courtrooms over those years and everything else? They basically, and not only did they withdraw their support financially, but we became sort of the pariah of the school choice movement. Those people, they don't know what they're doing. Okay, so now you've got dissension in the camp. All right, it's like a caddy and the player aren't getting along.
I'm thinking
it's
of
not
it.
a good situation here.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it in the sports analogy. Like the owner of the team wants her to be a different quarterback, and he's going to just walk away from the team altogether if he doesn't get to do it.
So,
well, probably general manager, not owner. It'd be the general manager.
What ends up happening is Betty Montgomery and her team make a decision. And the decision that they make is they bring in Ken Starr, Judge Starr, now deceased, and they bring in Ted Olson, who was the Solicitor General for the United States at the time. And they put together a strategy, and together they recruit an unknown player by the name of Judy French, who is an excellent lawyer and litigator for the state, and they decide that this is exactly the person to present this case to the United States Supreme Court. And the rest of the world says, who? What? Have you people lost your mind? For the next several months, I want to tell you, we were very, very, very busy in regards to briefs and amicus briefs and moot courts and all those pieces and parts that are essential. But when the day of the trial began, the day of the oral arguments began before the Supreme Court, the state of Ohio was represented by an unknown single mom by the name of Judy French.
And I have to be the bad guy and say it's time for a break. There's so much more to this story that we'll be telling in the final segment coming up. If you have to leave us, you'll have to listen online at thepublicsquare.com. All right, we've been on the edge of a cliff here. We're at the Supreme Court of the United States. Dave, let's pick up the story.
And it's 10:45 and the bell rings and we're there in front of the red curtain, and we are in the courtroom, and it takes hours to get in. You're not allowed to bring paper and pencil. You're not allowed to wear any lapel pins or buttons. I think they even decide what side of your hair you have to part it on. I mean, it's your head. It's just, I mean, it was, and there we were, and we are sitting on the front row.
In front of Ted Kennedy.
4 seats down.
I'm not impressed with stature. I'm not.
Did you throw anything at him? Or
No.
anything like that?
And
darn.
Betty Montgomery, the Attorney General, is on one side, and several other leaders in the state of Ohio on the other side, and there we are. And the bell rings. Oyez, oyez. You come up, and the announcement is, and they come out from behind the curtain, and they're seated. And I want to tell you, I have been through. I think we've been through everything. Not every, but darn near everything in every branch of government, state and federal, you can be in. That was the most disquieting experience you could imagine.
You were intimidated?
Nervous to the nth degree, because you've been at this for years. You've been in, this is your 6th courtroom, and you realize that in 45 minutes, there'll be nothing more said about this.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the time frame. So you say years. When to when? When did this happen?
97 to 2002.
Okay.
So at 5 years. And you've been at this for probably about 7 years total. And in just, there'll be no more words. No more words will matter. The final decision is right here. The finality of it is overwhelming. And up steps Judy French, the unknown. May it please the court. Now, I can tell you with certainty that may be the last word any lawyer gets out in the Supreme Court oral argument, because once that word is uttered, the justices can go anywhere, say anything, interrupt all they want. You may never get a chance to make your case.
Wow.
You may just have to spend your time answering their questions. But she, for some amazing reason, and I think it was all those parents back in Cleveland praying, she not only got a full hearing, it was incredible. And each step along the line, you could see the confidence growing. And it was amazing. It was, I mean, I get goosebumps thinking about it right now as to what happened. And I'm watching every face on the court. You know, you can't take notes. So Ken Starr's law firm had about 4 people that were assigned to memorize everything that was said in the order that the questions were asked and the answers, and judge the body language. And so when we got back after this, they did a full debrief of what just happened during the hearing, because that's what they get paid to do. She made her case, sat down. Up comes the opposition. And I'm telling you, it's as if someone turned the thermostat down 20 degrees. The ACLU lawyer was from, I think it was ACLU, but the lawyer was from New York. And he was a tall guy with a bad hairpiece. Right? and a New York accent. And so now this is the Rehnquist court. And the Rehnquist court was the kind of court that you even judged what kind of collars. If you were on the front row or before the bench, you better make darn sure that you did not wear a button-down shirt.
Oh, really?
Because Rehnquist hated button-down shirts, and no lawyer wanted to get off on the bad foot if Rehnquist didn't like your shirt.
Really?
This is the level of intensity that this is.
He had a look that I have adopted with my children that puts the fear of God in them.
The Rehnquist look.
The Rehnquist look.
Yes. And let me tell you how this plays out. This guy gets going, and he starts getting questions, and he's a big, tall guy, and he starts ramping up. Okay, the questions get more fast. He gets a little louder, and he's now starting to use a lot of hand gestures. Okay, he's like the antithesis of this single mom Judy French. All right, and he said ba-bam, 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 and big gestures. And Rehnquist asks him a question, and he starts to answer the question, and then Rehnquist starts to ask a second question into him, and the guy interrupts the Supreme Court justice and talks over him. At which point in time, it's the look.
He lowers his glasses just below his eyes.
The Chief Justice says absolutely nothing, but he looks at this guy, and this guy's got his hand in the air, stops mid-sentence, and says, not, however, to interrupt the Chief Justice, of course, and backs down, and Rehnquist said, I should certainly hope not. It was all downhill from there. The second lawyer got up trying to make a Jeffersonian argument remonstrances and federal funds, and this guy, his presentation melted into nothingness. And before you knew it, the time was over. It was over, and the case is remanded. That's it. It's boom. That's it. They hit the gavel. It's over. We all get up and we leave, and then we're looking at each other saying, "Did you hear what I hear? Did you see what I did?" And then we jump in. You got to do the steps thing. You got to do the announcements. You got to do the press release thing. You all got to stand on the steps.
It's like playing a game and you don't know the score for a couple months.
Yeah. So we go through all that stuff, and there's all the pictures. In fact, I had a reporter from Ohio call me not so long ago because I was going back to old footage. All right, and I went back to the old footage, and what ended up happening was I saw your picture on the steps, and I listened to the news conference you did that, and she said, I wonder, are you still alive? Yeah, I'm still here.
I heard you. I didn't know you. We didn't know each other, but I heard you on the radio. I was in my home, and I heard you on the radio talk about this after it all happened and after the decision came out, and you said, I've never experienced the ACLU completely melt down in front of a court before, but they
it was
just,
a Wizard of Oz
vanished.
moment.
And that's when I said, I got to get this guy to my church. I got to meet this guy.
It was an extraordinary situation. So we got back to Ken Starr's office, we debriefed, and there was this feeling like no lawyer would ever celebrate after an oral argument. But there was a look around the room and it was of stunned disbelief. Did you hear what I heard? We rehearsed the whole thing and we said, are we missing something? No. And what's fascinating was the conclusion was at that point in time that the legal strategy that Betty Montgomery put together, delivered by the choices that she made, had the strongest potential of winning the critical fifth vote from Justice O'Connor, that we had done the strategy from the start as planned.
In arguments where we lost, the arguments that were made are some of the arguments that she used to justify her decision.
Exactly. Long and short of it, we won the case. The headlines came out. Biggest case on NBC News, biggest case since Brown versus Board of Education. We won 5-4.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. It may be the most important ruling involving schools in America since Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education, which ended school segregation. Tonight, the U.S. Supreme Court has sanctioned school vouchers.
What's the lesson? Why tell this story today?
Judy French, the lawyer, in the height of, this is the highest moment of a lawyer's career. The case that you cannot even fathom the importance of it, calls Patty Maruntis in Washington, D.C., we're all there, at 7 o'clock in the morning saying, Patty, I need your help. Judy, what do you need? I've got a run in my pantyhose. And I need a pair, and I'm in a big, I've got no time, I'm nowhere. Can somebody help me? Patty Maruntis took care of it. And through this entire case, you say, wait a minute, that is so anticlimactic. What are you talking about? My point is you never know the smallest thing that could go wrong. You never know the smallest thing that could make all the difference. You never know what's going to happen. The question is, if you're there and your spirit is one of service and prayer, and you have the opportunity to help, the smallest moment can be utilized in history.
That was back in the day when women wore pantyhose all the time. And if you had a run in your stocking, it was a confidence smasher. It was everyone's looking at
all day long. Yeah.
You were just self-conscious that something about you wasn't complete or something about you wasn't right. So for Patty to help Judith French fix that element, it made the difference when Judy walked into the courtroom and she didn't have to deal with something that would shape up to shake her confidence. So those details do matter. The little things matter.
And what really matters to me is that the team here at the American Policy Roundtable was thrilled to help.
Well, we thank God for that outcome. And I tell you, there's much more to the story. We're going to tell it on the daily edition of The Public Square TPS Express. Check it out at thepublicsquare.com or use our smartphone app, free, The Public Square.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.